state for the record how we got to this point. Mr. Hazelwood was arrested in August, charged with the crimes that are in the indictment. And he had a history of mental illness, and at some point earlier this year, we had concerns about whether his medication was being whether he was being treated appropriately. We brought those concerns to the court's attention, and there was a competency eval order. The evaluation has been completed, and we're here to present evidence on the results of that evaluation. And with that, we're ready to proceed. Go ahead. The defense calls Dr. Christian Hildreth.
I do.
May proceed to state and spell your name for the record.
Christian Hildreth, that's Hildreth.
Dr. Hildreth, could you tell the court what is your profession?
I am a clinical psychologist.
And where are you employed?
I'm employed at Central State Hospital.
And what is your title at Central State Hospital?
I am the forensic director.
Okay. And would you tell the court a little bit about your educational background?
Okay. I received my doctorate in clinical psychology from the Georgia School of Professional Psychology in 1998. I was subsequently licensed to practice psychology in the state of Alabama, where I practiced in a private practice for approximately 5 years. Then began practicing at Searcy Hospital, which was the state psychiatric hospital in Alabama. During that time, I received training and certification as a forensic examiner for the state of Alabama. And then in 2008, moved to Georgia and subsequently licensed to practice psychology in Georgia. Since that time, I've worked as a psychologist at Central State, most of the time in the forensic department, and then began in, I believe, 2012 as a forensic director.
Okay. And while at Central State Hospital, have you ever been called upon to conduct court-ordered evaluations to determine whether a criminal defendant is competent to stand trial?
Yes, I have.
Approximately how many evaluations have you conducted in your career?
It's been more than 100.
Okay.
I do not know the exact number.
Okay, that's fine. Have you ever testified in a Georgia court as an expert witness regarding any court-ordered evaluations?
Yes, I have.
Do you know approximately how many times you've testified as an expert witness? In a ballpark would be fine.
Yeah, it's around 90 to 100 times in Georgia.
Have you received any specialized training in how to conduct evaluations into a criminal defendant's competency to stand trial?
Yeah, like I had said earlier, I received training in Alabama and was certified as a forensic examiner in Alabama. Continually receive, continuing education and training and reading on how to complete and evaluate defendants' competency to stand trial.
Are you familiar with the tests relied upon by Georgia courts to determine competency to stand trial?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Can you tell the court a little bit about those standards?
Essentially, there are 3 prongs to determining whether somebody is competent to stand trial. One is understanding their condition in reference to the charges, having a rational and factual understanding of the courtroom proceedings, and an ability to assist their attorney in their defense.
Okay. And did you follow those standards in that test in this case?
Yes, I did.
Your Honor, I would move to qualify Dr. Hildreth as an expert in the field of forensic psychiatry capable of rendering an opinion on whether Mr. Hazelwood is competent to stand trial.
No objection to the statement.
will be so qualified.
Thank you. Dr. Hildreth, how did you become involved in this case?
Typically, when a court order is issued by the court and an individual is admitted to our facility, they're typically set on a rotation to be evaluated. With a case such as this, there are two evaluators, one being a senior evaluator, at least one being a senior evaluator.
Okay.
And that is how I specifically got involved with the case.
And did you review any documents or records before conducting an evaluation in this case?
Dr. Hildreth, could you explain in a little more detail the difference between a senior and a junior and the necessity to have a senior?
Yes, ma'am. Basically, when we're talking about a senior psychologist, it's just someone with more experience doing the evaluations. It's not a formal designation as such, but that someone who has been worked for the department, has done multiple evaluations and has done evaluations to this level.
And the reason for two?
The reason for two is just to make sure that all bases are covered on a serious offense.
Sorry, Mr.
Oh, no problem. Dr. Hildreth, did you review any documents or records before conducting the evaluation?
Yes, I did.
Do you recall the records that you reviewed?
Yes. There was a large file that included multiple medical records, psychoed evaluations, some therapy notes, school psychological evaluations, occupational therapy evaluations. There were also reviews of letters related to Mr. Hazelwood's condition and his history, as well as evaluations completed for him on psychological purposes, as well as his records even in the hospital.
Okay. Is it fair to say you reviewed an extensive amount of documents and records prior to conducting the evaluation?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Did you speak to anyone about Mr. Hazelwood before conducting his evaluation?
I spoke with his attorneys, and then his treating physicians and treatment team.
Okay. And did you prepare a report of your findings after you concluded the evaluation?
Yes, I did.
And did you deliver that report to the court?
Yes, I did.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
May. And for the record, the court is in possession of that report.
Does that appear to be the report that you completed and sent to the court?
Yes, it does.
Your Honor, I move for the admission of Dr. Hildreth's report, and it's kind of out of order, but I have it as Defense Exhibit C.
Any objection?
No objection.
It's in.
And do you have a copy of your report there with you?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Before asking you about the report, do you recall when Mr. Hazelwood arrived at your facility?
Yes, I do.
Can you describe his general mental state and appearance?
At the time he was admitted to the hospital, of course, he arrived in the detention centers, appeared somewhat disheveled. He appeared confused, frequently stating he wasn't sure where he was, why he was there. I spoke with him a couple of times during the first day. The first time just to, after the psychiatrist had seen him, just to introduce myself, as well as to to get a brief understanding of his current state. And then later in the day, again, spoke with him again because he appeared confused. I had explained to him why he was in the hospital, what was likely to happen. I encouraged him to participate as much as he could and to give as much information to his treating team so that he could, his hospital stay could be as short as possible. And then, as usual, ask him, if there's anything we can do, let me know. I came back to him a couple of days later to check on him again, just to see again how he was doing. And then a couple weeks later, after he had been prescribed medication, again to check.
Okay. And did you notice a change in his general mental state and appearance?
Mr. Berger, can we get some dates?
So he was admitted on February 14th, 2017. Okay. So I saw him on the 14th. I saw him 2 days later, and then I saw him, actually sat and talked with him briefly. It was approximately 2 weeks later after that.
Okay. And would you, just for the record, what date did you actually conduct an evaluation of Mr. Hazelwood?
It was on March 13th.
Okay. And did you notice a change in his general mental state and appearance from the time he was admitted until today?
Yes.
Can you describe the change in his mental state and appearance?
So initially when he came in and he was frequently stating he didn't know why he was here in the hospital, he was had difficulties or was unable to complete sentences. He was unable to have any kind of a discussion at all with me and actually with our reports with other practitioners, other than reporting hearing voices. And so by March 13th, he was able to have a rational and coherent discussion with me. He showed no signs of confusion. His speech was goal-directed. It was clear, normal rate and rhythm. He didn't show any significant problems speaking or understanding what I was saying or even comprehending what I was saying.
Okay. And you stated earlier that there were medications prescribed for Mr. Hazelwood. Can you tell the court what medications were prescribed and why?
Okay. So he was prescribed, mainly was a Zyprexa. Zyprexa is an antipsychotic medication, and basically it's used to treat symptoms of psychosis.
Okay.
He was also given some medication, I believe it was Benadryl for sleep.
Okay.
And then he got a medication called Cogentin, and that is a medication to assist with side effects that are sometimes associated with antipsychotic medications.
Okay.
Can you tell me what that first one was again?
Zyprexa, that's Zyprexa.
And can you just explain for us lay persons what does psychosis mean?
Okay. So psychosis is a condition in which an individual experiences difficulties with their thoughts. It can include hearing voices that other people aren't hearing, on rare occasions seeing things that other people don't hear. Often the thinking gets somewhat confused and they have beliefs about things that are, in the face of real evidence, aren't true. Those are typically called delusions, and they tend to be, most of the time, pretty hard, fast. You can't sort of talk somebody out of these beliefs. There's disorganized speech which doesn't tend to make sense, doesn't follow a logical to a logical trail or conclusion. And then sometimes there's behavior that's considered disorganized or even catatonic. And disorganized behavior is behavior that doesn't appear to make sense. You're engaging in a behavior that doesn't appear to have a logical consequence. Catatonia is a situation in which somebody has a lack of movement.
Okay. And do you recall the specific symptoms that you observed in Mr. Hazelwood?
So Mr. Hazelwood had some confusion. He did report, even during the evaluation, that he was hearing voices. Some were friends, but sometimes he was hearing thoughts of demons. Even had a belief that sometimes that God would send him messages through the television, and that he felt like sometimes that people were watching him through the walls.
Okay. I'm going to ask you some questions related to Mr. Hazelwood's background. You reviewed his medical history.
Yeah, I did.
Can you just state for the record his medical history that you reviewed?
Okay, so it's a long history. That's why I gave pause. So Mr. Hazelwood, according to the records, appears to have been receiving some sort of treatment since about the age of 3 years old. Initially, he was demonstrating some difficulties with his thinking and expressing himself, and social and emotional cues and abilities. Around 2001, he was actually diagnosed with what's called an Asperger's disorder. That's ASPERGER', which is a disorder on the autistic spectrum. And essentially what this is some basically significant difficulties with relating to other people, understanding social cues that would allow him to make better social decisions. He was also, I believe, diagnosed even with an attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So he received treatment with that, and throughout a lot of his school. He however, as he got older, he began having more and more difficulties with things like anger management, some obsessive thoughts that he has, and those are thoughts that keep going over and over in his head, and focusing on that. He was hospitalized in 2012. I'm trying to count how many times in 2012 he was hospitalized. It was multiple times. Initially he was diagnosed with a mood disorder. He was prescribed some medications for that, for management of his mood and his thoughts. Ultimately, he was re-hospitalized for things like homicidal thoughts and suicidal thoughts. Hearing voices, particularly hearing voices about trying to hurt himself or others, and then ultimately was diagnosed with a schizoaffective disorder.
Okay. And you gave, in giving his history, you talked about a number of different diagnoses. Is that something that's common?
It is common to have different diagnoses. As a child, when he was experiencing difficulties with relating to others, and he had some difficulties with his thought processing, that is consistent with more developmental issues, whether it was attention with the attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or when he was diagnosed with Asperger's. Typically something like a true psychotic disorder like schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder doesn't tend to really appear until very late adolescence, early adulthood. The typical time is really in someone's late, like 18 to 20s, when that first appears. So it's not untypical to have that kind of diagnostic history. It's also not untypical for the Asperger's and the attention deficit to carry through into adulthood. When he started having significant mood issues where he would need to be hospitalized and stuff, that's when those tend to get diagnosed. One of the difficulties with diagnosing, particularly with, say, Mr. Hazelwood, is that he does present with real symptoms of psychosis, as we can see, but there was a difficulty in saying, yes, Mr. Hazelwood has schizophrenia, because there's some other symptoms that he didn't seem to have. However, he did show some symptoms consistent with an Asperger's disorder, and the social understanding, social cues, and being able to follow through with them, and particularly as he presented initially, he was experiencing a lot of anxiety, and so as he experiences the anxiety, he tends to sort of shut down and present with a somewhat confused and not understanding it, almost as if his thought processes are slowing down.
Okay. And there also appeared to be a number of different medications prescribed for Mr. Hazelwood throughout his life. Is that also something that's common?
It is.
And can you explain why?
There are multiple reasons why someone would be on different medications. Medications, particularly for serious mood disorders and psychotic disorders, have different side effects, and for different people have different side effects. And so there could be some changes to get to make sure that he's taking a medication where he can be comfortable with. Another thing, and it's even common with our working with Mr. Hazelwood, is that even though the medications seem to allow him to make progress and to become, to be able to discuss things in a rational, coherent manner, to manage those thoughts, and that he continues to report hearing voices. However, he's saying now that he can control them a little bit better. And so, changing medications is sometimes a way to maybe attempt to get a better control over the voices, and if possible, to make them stop.
So is it fair to say that for Mr. Hazelwood and the symptoms that were presented, there needs to be sort of a give and take between Mr. Hazelwood and the doctor, with understanding what's working and what's not working?
Yes, it does.
Okay. I am going to turn to actually the nuts and bolts of the evaluation. And before I go through the different steps and the different things that you were assessing, I'm going to ask the answer, and then we're going to go back, okay?
Okay.
So after reviewing his medical history, after speaking to his lawyers, after speaking to Mr. Hazelwood over a period of time, you conducted an evaluation, correct?
Yes.
And you came to an opinion as to whether Mr. Hazelwood was competent to stand trial, did you not?
I did.
And what was your opinion?
My opinion was that Mr. Hazelwood, at the time of the evaluation, was competent to stand trial.
Okay. So let's talk about the nuts and bolts of the evaluation. How did you begin the evaluation with Mr. Hazelwood?
I began the evaluation with the presentation of his rights, just so that make sure that he understood the purpose of the evaluation, and the nature of the evaluation and where the report was going.
Okay.
And then that follows with making sure that he understands that.
And did he appear to understand that?
Yes, he did.
Okay. And what did you do next?
And then I briefly asked him, what was his understanding of why he was in the hospital, and for which he responded that, he was here for a competency evaluation and get some medicine so that he could become competent to stand trial.
Okay.
Doctor, I don't want to stop you, but you said he understood that he was there to decide, for you to decide, or there to be a decision about whether he's competent. Did you use that word?
I don't think so.
Can you, you may not remember specifically, but to the extent you can you give me as specific or contextually how the conversation went?
Okay. Yeah, he basically said that that he knew that he was in the hospital, that he has a mental disorder. He actually said that it was that he has been diagnosed as schizoaffective disorder and that he needs medicine for that, and that he was there so that he could be tested to go back to court.
Okay. And do you recall the questions that you asked of him while you were given the evaluation?
Yes.
Okay. Can you?
For the most part. So, well, initially what I did was got background and history from him. There are a couple of purposes for that. One is to allow him the ability to be able to logically and rationally discuss something that is not necessarily, strictly competency-related questions, and that helps also to help get a feel of his, ability to relate information. It also allows us to get an idea of his memory, of his historical memory.
Okay.
And that was followed by a specific mental status exam in which, of course, he was observed throughout the evaluation, asked specific questions about what symptoms he may be experiencing. Was he hearing voices? If so, what were the voices saying? Did he have any thoughts about people trying to harm him or people harming him? Or any beliefs that he has any special abilities or powers? This would get into what we call grandiose beliefs. And then asking him specific other questions like, do you feel like that the radio or television is asking you or telling you or giving you specific messages or asking you special things? Suicidal and homicidal thoughts, history, and then some his understanding of his condition, for which he had earlier described, that he was diagnosed with a schizoaffective disorder, and he understood that he needs to take medicine because without medicine he has problems with his thinking.
Okay. I'm going to ask you the questions related to sort of his understanding of the proceedings and his ability to assist his lawyers. I'm going to ask you if you came to an opinion about each one, and then I'm going to ask you to tell the court the factors and things that you saw in coming to that conclusion, okay?
Yes.
So, did you come to an opinion as to whether Mr. Hazelwood is capable of understanding the proceedings?
Yes, I did.
And what was your opinion with respect to that?
That he does have the ability to understand the proceedings.
And can you tell the court the factors that you looked at and relied upon in coming to that conclusion?
Okay. So one of the things that I asked specifically is his understanding of how a courtroom or hearing works, whether or not that this is an adversarial situation or is everybody, sort of on the same side, for which he expressed that he understood. He understood the roles of his attorneys to defend him, to help him, and the district attorney is to prosecute him. That the judge's role is to be impartial, to listen to the evidence and then pass the sentence.
Okay.
Again, Doctor, did you use
Yes.
the word impartial?
He did use the word impartial.
Okay. And you just stated that you determined that he was able to assist his attorneys in preparing his defense?
Yes.
Can you tell the court the factors that you looked at in coming to that conclusion?
Okay. So, first of all, he was able to identify who you were, what his beliefs and his feelings are about, about what your role is and about what your role specifically to him, where he said, everything they've done so far has been good for me, and he has discussed how had talked with you and the social work related to the case, and how he's been able to tell as much as he can about his side of the index alleged offense.
Okay.
Part of that is his ability to communicate with me in a rational, coherent, and linear fashion, so that I know that he can tell you in a narrative specific events when asked, or can even give you information that he believes may be relevant or not, but just based on his judgment, to be able to give you information that he sees fit.
Okay.
Part of that was, too, is his understanding of what the index offense was, and then what kind of memory and understanding he has, not of the event. We do not ask about the actual crime itself, but time periods surrounding the crime.
Okay. And did you come to an opinion as to whether Mr. Hazelwood comprehended his own condition in reference to the proceedings?
Yes, we did.
And what are the factors that you looked at in coming to that conclusion?
So the first thing I asked was, do you know what you're charged with? And Mr. Hazelwood indicated that he did know what he was charged with. He initially said serious felonies, and let's leave it at that. However, he was able to discuss the seriousness of his charges, and he was able to, when presented with those charges, just sort of acknowledge that he was understood that that's what they were. He understood and demonstrated that he could understand potential penalties for the crimes that he's been charged with. He was able to discuss various pleas involved, and including what happens when you make certain pleas.
Was he able to tell you the difference between felonies and misdemeanors?
He was.
Okay. At some point in your report, we've discussed about the medications that Mr. Hazelwood is currently on.
Mm-hmm.
At some point, you discussed a concern about if this case were to go to trial and potential things that could happen with Mr. Hazelwood if he's not on his medication. Can you discuss that a little bit with the court?
Yes. Although Mr. Hazelwood has a rational and factual understanding of what happens during a trial, and does have the ability at this time to be able to attend to hearing and proceedings, a long drawn-out trial because of his presentation initially when he was in the hospital. As he becomes more anxious, there is a chance that he would have difficulties and close down in a prolonged trial with a lot of evidence being presented.
Okay. So is your opinion that he can, as of today, he can sit and he can listen to witnesses and inform his attorneys about consequences or inconsistencies, but you may have a concern if he gets, I guess, over anxious or stressed?
Yes.
Okay. And could you explain that a little bit better than I did for the court? When Mr. Hazelwood, and judging this from conversations with
the attorneys in reviewing his records and even his presentation when he first came to the hospital. In new and novel situations, Mr. Hazelwood does experience some anxiety, which I guess would be typical of anybody in his situation. So there's probably some, shaking of his legs and feet and a little bit of his hands. But as that goes prolonged, sometimes what happens is that Mr. Hazelwood tends to, for lack of a better word, shut down. He stops sort of attending to what's going on around him as the anxiety increases. The evaluation that we did with Mr. Hazelwood was over an extended period of time. I've watched Mr. Hazelwood in his interactions with the other individuals and staff at the hospital. During normal courses of time, I don't see that as a major problem, but the stresses of a prolonged trial, he may have some of those anxiety issues.
Okay.
And particularly if not continuing on his medication.
Okay.
Dr. Hilbert, how would that affect your opinion on his ability to assist his attorney or understand the proceedings?
In working with his attorneys, I don't think that affects it much at all. I think Mr. Hazelwood has demonstrated an ability to indicate to his attorneys and show them when he's having difficulties. Sorry, I missed the second part of your...
Yeah, I'll follow up. So, am I understanding what you're saying to be that while there might be difficulties getting through a prolonged trial, it doesn't change your opinion of his competency? It just might require, and I've read the report, so I may be reading something, it would require recesses and time periods for more conversations with attorneys to understand where he is?
Yes. That is actually what I'm saying, yes, ma'am.
And is it fair to say that it would be very important to make sure that he's taking his medication as prescribed in a timely manner?
Yes.
And if he were not taking his medication as prescribed, what do you believe would happen?
There's a good possibility that that he will revert back to where he was when he first was admitted to the hospital in February. Presenting as confused, making statements that, he's not sure where he is and what's going on. I believe he'd had more difficulties controlling and managing the voices that he hears that we don't hear.
Okay. And you stated earlier that he did indicate that he had hallucinations.
Hold on a minute, Mr. Gardner. I just want to ask a question while we're on
Sure.
the issue. You indicated a moment ago that when he presented, when he was admitted in February, that clearly he was disheveled, he was confused, he didn't seem to understand where he was and why. You're not indicating that necessarily he was not taking his medication at that point?
No.
Can you, for the record, can you explain? It sounds like if you don't know the history of where he was and how he got there, based on what you just said, if he doesn't take his medication, he would revert to where he was February 14th when he presented at the hospital. Can you explain where he came from and how he was being treated at that time? Because it sounds like you're saying he wasn't taking medication that he should have been taking at that time.
So, yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, he was prescribed medication in Fulton County Jail, a medication that appeared not to be working for him.
Okay.
And so, part of what we do at the hospital is make sure that he is on a medication that's working for him. Okay. Right now, and I know that he has been prescribed different medications that have appeared to work. So right now, the medication that he's taking appears to be working for him, and so my recommendation was that he continue on that regimen rather than making changes to that medication.
Okay. And just to follow up with this discussion, do you understand when I say the term medication is at a therapeutic level, what that means?
Generally.
Could you explain to the court what it means to take medication so that it's at a therapeutic level?
The best I can, because I'm not a psychiatrist, and don't prescribe medications. The medications that
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Hildreth, I'm Linda Donakowski. I'm the prosecutor in this case. And I just want to clarify a few things for the record. When you received all the information about Mr. Hazelwood, did you also receive all of the police reports about the incident itself?
Yes, I did.
Okay, including his statements to the police?
Yes, I did.
And you reviewed those in preparation for your evaluation with Mr. Hazelwood?
Yes, I did.
And Mr. Hazelwood was born on July 10th, 1996?
Yes, I believe so.
All right, so he will turn this July 21 years old. And you mentioned that he had been hospitalized on numerous occasions back in 2012, is that right?
Yes.
And how old was he then? He was 16, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And I think you mentioned that when he was 16 years old, he has these multiple hospitalizations, and that is when sort of all these disorders start blossoming, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And I also wanted to be clear about something you said. You had done the evaluation for Mr. Hazelwood on March 13th, 2017, is that right?
That's correct.
But I think you also testified that you'd also seen him on other occasions after that?
Yeah, before that and as well, yeah.
Okay. And given that the evaluation was done on March 13th, and here we are today, May 3rd, has there been any change in your opinion during this period of time as to his competency?
No, there has not.
Right. And from the time you saw him on March 13th to now, those times that you have seen him, I think you said interacting with staff and some other occasions, is that consistent with what you saw during his evaluation?
Yes, it is.
So this medication is working for him to maintain his competency?
I believe so, yes.
And I want to clarify one other thing also. You said when he first arrived on February 14th, 2017, his affect was very confused, hearing the voices, controlling anger and emotions and things were very difficult for him. And then I think you also said during the evaluation he exhibited some of these things as well. Did I get that wrong, or did he exhibit some of that during the evaluation on March 13th?
He reported that he was hearing voices, and that he had some beliefs that people were watching him through the walls, that he was getting some messages from God from the television at that time. You know, there were some mild attention problems that he showed, and but not even close to what he was when he was first admitted.
And nothing about those particular reports from him would keep you from finding him competent under the three prongs to proceed in a legal proceeding?
That's correct.
And when you said a prolonged trial, I know a lot of people see TV and they think we are on trial for months and months. What, in your opinion, is a prolonged trial?
If it lasted longer than a week, and that's just an estimate, you know, all day for, you know, for a full week, you know, he may begin to start having some problems, I think, depending on, you know, the extent of how long he has to sit and what's presented during the, you know, would depend on how his levels of anxiety would wax and wane.
But as it is right now, your opinion is that he is interacting with his attorneys and can bring to their attention his anxiety level.
That's correct.
Because he's very aware of his mental health status.
He is aware.
And is it your opinion that he is able to make decisions about moving forward with a criminal proceeding?
Yes, it is.
And so he has shown sufficient knowledge of who the judge is, who the prosecution is, and all of the options, meaning going forward to trial, taking a plea, and any sentencing options.
Yes.
And do you believe that he would be able to assist his attorneys in helping them with strategy, like locating witnesses or other people that might be able to help him in his defense?
Yes, I do.
And just so we're clear, when someone is mentally ill, okay, and they take medication, it's not like a broken leg where, okay, my broken leg's healed now because I've been on some painkillers and everything's fine and I can use the leg again. They're always in a condition of mental illness, but you can treat that to make them competent so that they understand what's happening in a criminal proceeding. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Okay. If you have a different opinion, or I want your opinion about that.
Yeah, mental illnesses are long-lasting. You treat them, you don't cure them for the most part, and particularly the serious mental illnesses, and you do treat them. And people who are receiving an appropriate level of treatment or have learned to cope with the symptoms they experience, do well in the community, and are competent to stand trial. Having a mental illness or having some symptoms of a mental illness doesn't necessitate that you're not competent to stand trial.
Thank you. That's all I have. Thank you.
There are two matters, just to make sure the record is clear on it. I asked the court to qualify him as an expert in forensic psychiatry, and it's forensic psychology is what I need to ask, or I want to make sure that the record is clear with respect to that.
Is so qualified.
Thank you. And with Dr. Hazelwood, I just want to also make sure that we're clear that it is your opinion that Mr. Hazelwood does understand his own condition in relation to the proceeding.
Yes.
Thank you. That's all I have.
A couple other questions. Sorry, Dr. Can you explain what malingering is, and is that something that you consider in this case?
Okay. So malingering is feigning or exaggerating symptoms that you would experience, whether it's a physical condition or a psychological condition. And so somebody basically, and there's a second component to that, and which would include for secondary gain. In case of criminal proceedings, if I can feign having a serious mental illness, then maybe I can stay out of the court or get maybe a lesser sentence or get NGRI and get to stay.
NGRI.
And not guilty by reason of insanity verdict, and go to the hospital instead of prison. So there's some sort of built-in secondary gains for criminal cases. Yes, we did consider malingering. That's one of the reasons why I frequently checked in on Mr. Hazelwood and observed him at times when he was not even aware that I was observing him, to make sure that there was consistency in his presentation and behavior. During the evaluation, his presentation was, again, clear and logical and coherent. There was nothing inconsistent with his reports that were reported from previous psychiatric history. And so it was determined that he was not likely to be malingering at that time.
Have you had experience dealing with clients that you have felt have been malingering?
Yes, I have.
In your opinion, you understand the different legal statuses. You mentioned not guilty by reason of insanity. You're also aware of a guilty but mentally ill status.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes, I am.
In your opinion, does Mr. Hazelwood fit into that category? I'm not asking you to determine the guilt part. I'm asking you about the mentally ill part only, for the record to be clear. I'm not asking you to comment on what occurred in this case, whether he is guilty or not guilty. But if the court were to find Mr. Hazelwood competent and he wished to enter a plea, it's your understanding that he is competent to make that decision?
Yes.
Correct? And would he fall into the category, if he chose to enter a plea, of the mentally ill part of a guilty? That makes sense, without commenting on whether he's guilty or not guilty. I'm not asking for that.
Right. I believe so. I do believe that Mr. Hazelwood has a mental illness. You know, we have struggled with exactly putting a label on his mental illness. He definitely has some difficulties with social interactions, understanding visual cues that are consistent with the Asperger's, you know, but he never quite fit into the full spectrum of an autistic disorder based on the DSM-5. He
DSM-5 being the
diagnostic,
tool that
yes,
psychologists and psychiatrists use.
sorry. Yes, he does fit a category for having psychosis. It was very clear that when he presented in the hospital, that his thought processes were not clear and organized. Yes, he was experiencing anxiety, but it was beyond an anxiety. You know, he has consistently reported what we consider appropriate hallucinations, or hearing voices that other people don't hear, things consistent with a psychosis, not the things you hear on TV or see on TV and hear about. You know, but his overall presentation wasn't fully consistent with schizophrenia. And however, with that being said, it's very clear to us and the opinion of myself and the hospital that Mr. Hazelwood does have a serious mental illness that includes significant symptoms of psychosis, difficulties relating to other people, at times in a following the norms of society, such that, you know, that yes, he does have what I would consider a serious mental illness.
Anything else?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you, Dr. Appreciate it.
May I have a comment?
Sure. Mr. Hazelwood, do you have any questions at this time, or are you okay?
Your Honor, defense called Dr. Felix Sinton.
Do you swear affirm the testimony given today to the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
You may proceed to state and spell your name for the record.
First name is Selig, S-E-L-I-G. Last name Sinman, C-Y-N-M-A-N.
Thank you, Dr. Sinman. I understand that this is your first time testifying. Is that correct?
In a situation like this, yes.
Okay. So we're going to take it slow and just listen to my questions. And if you have any questions or you don't understand, just please let me know, okay?
Thank you.
What is your profession?
I'm a medical doctor specializing in child, adolescent, and adult psychiatry.
Okay. Dr. Sinman, what is your educational background?
I received a Bachelor of Science degree from UCLA, majoring in biochemistry in 1976. I went on to complete medical school and receive a medical doctor degree, also from UCLA, in 1980. I subsequently completed a residency in general psychiatry at UCLA and the West Los Angeles Veterans Administration Hospital. That was in 1983. And I completed a fellowship in child and adolescent psychiatry at the UCLA Neuropsychiatric Institute in 1985.
Okay. And do you have any special certifications or licenses?
Well, as a medical doctor, I'm a diplomat of the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology.
Can you explain what that means?
It means that I qualified subsequent to medical school and internship to essentially practice medicine prior to specializing in psychiatry.
Okay.
And then I went on after my psychiatric training to become certified by the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology in general psychiatry, and then subsequently certified by the same agency, the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology, in child and adolescent psychiatry.
Okay. And so you are a psychiatrist.
Yes, sir.
And could you explain to the court the difference between a psychologist and a psychiatrist?
It is largely based on training. I trained first as a medical doctor. Probably the most practical difference is that as a medical doctor, I am permitted to and licensed to prescribe medication. There is some overlap in the diagnostic tools that we use and the psychotherapy or the counseling tools that we use. Again, the main difference is that I prescribe medication in my practice.
Okay. And do you own your own business or do you work for someone?
I own my own business.
Okay. And how long have you owned your own business?
Essentially since 1985, I developed my own private practice in Southern California, practiced there from 1985 to 1995, and then established my own practice of psychiatry here in Georgia in 1996.
Okay. And do you know the young man seated at the defense table?
I do.
Who is he?
Jeffrey Hazelwood.
What is or was your relationship to Mr. Hazelwood?
Mr. Hazelwood is a former patient of mine.
Okay. And approximately how many years did you treat Mr. Hazelwood?
I treated him for approximately 3 years.
Okay. Why did Mr. Hazelwood seek medical treatment from you?
Mr. Hazelwood was referred to me by his pediatrician after he had recently had a psychiatric hospitalization. So this is a different psychiatric hospitalization that was referred to earlier.
Okay.
And his symptoms at that time included a fear of being spied on. He talked as a specific about a belief that there were cameras in his home monitoring his behavior. He talked about hearing voices that other people didn't hear. He talked about having a depressed mood, difficulty sustaining attention, and difficulty sleeping. He was on multiple medications when he presented to me. And just as a point of reference, as was mentioned earlier, Mr. Hazelwood had been under psychiatric care since approximately 8 years of age.
Okay. And did you observe any symptoms of psychiatric disorders while treating Mr. Hazelwood?
Yes, I did.
And what were those?
So over the course of the 3 years that I treated Mr. Hazelwood, his symptoms included auditory hallucinations, that is, hearing things that others wouldn't hear, and visual hallucinations, that is, seeing things that others wouldn't see. Paranoid thinking, as I referenced before, having beliefs that he was being monitored, for example. Sadness, suicidal thinking, difficulty relating to others appropriately. He had difficulty sustaining attention, difficulty sleeping, excessive worry, irritability, and agitation.
Okay.
And I subsequently found Mr. Hazelwood diagnostically to have schizoaffective disorder, which was mentioned earlier. And this is a condition that is manifest by hallucinations, delusions, and a imbalance or disorder of mood. And in Mr. Hazelwood's case, this was persistent depression. I also found him to have generalized anxiety disorder. Some of these symptoms have already been mentioned as well, manifest by excessive worry, restlessness and feeling keyed up and on edge, irritability, difficulty concentrating, and difficulty sleeping.
Okay. And how did you treat these symptoms?
I provided both medication treatment, individual psychotherapy, as well as family psychotherapy.
Okay. Did you make a record of your treatment of Mr. Hazelwood?
Yes, I did.
How did you make that record?
I took notes during our sessions and took notes on other communication, that is some phone calls, and would keep these notes in a file.
Okay. And are those notes and file kept in the regular course of your business?
Yes.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor? I'm going to show you a document that has been previously marked for identification as Exhibit A. Do you recognize that document?
Yes.
What is that document?
This is a document that I prepared indicating that the copy of the Mr. Hazelwood's medical record that I provided you or your office was a true and accurate copy of the original.
Okay. And did the certification accompany the file?
Yes.
Okay. Your Honor, may I approach the witness? I'm going to show you something that has been previously marked for identification as Exhibit B. Do you recognize this box?
Yes.
And do you recognize the contents contained within this box?
Yes, I do.
What are those documents?
This is a true and accurate copy of Mr. Hazelwood's medical record. It includes records from outside sources that were previously given to me that I provided to your office.
So that is the true and accurate complete file that you had of Mr. Hazelwood?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, I remove for the admission of Exhibit A and Exhibit B into the record.
I just want to clarify that this is a true and accurate copy
Yes, sir.
of the record.
Yes, sir. And, Your Honor, for the record, we have placed those documents into digital format. We've given a copy to the state. We've provided a copy to the court reporter. We also have a copy for the court. So I would ask that the digital copy be allowed to replace the physical papers in the file.
Any objection? No objection. We'll replace this file.
Thank you. Okay, Dr. Sinman. I would like for you to take a look at a document that was previously marked as Exhibit B1 for identification purposes. It's a two-page document. Do you recognize that document?
Yes, I do.
What is that document?
Page 1 is a fax cover sheet that was prepared in my office. The second page is a document that I prepared indicating the medications that I had last prescribed for Mr. Hazelwood.
Okay, and when did you send that document to the jail?
The document is dated August 5th, 2016. That's the date that it was faxed to the jail.
Okay. Your Honor, I would move for the admission of Defense Exhibit B1 into the record.
No objection.
Then,
Would you turn to the second page of that? Well, first, before you do that, do you know if the jail actually gave Mr. Hazelwood any of the drugs that you listed on that document?
No, I do not.
Okay. What are antipsychotics?
So antipsychotics are a class of medication primarily used to treat psychosis. Psychosis being defined as an alteration in the state of mind whereby hallucinations, that is, perceptions of hearing things or seeing things, and an alteration of thought, that is, having false beliefs, are present to an extent that the person is rendered disconnected from reality. So antipsychotics are medications used primarily to treat psychosis, conditions that involve psychosis. They are also used for other reasons, including mood stabilization and to treat other conditions as well.
Okay. Now, would you take a look at Exhibit B1 with respect to the drugs that you have listed? Is it fair to say that those were the medications that you had prescribed for Mr. Hazelwood, and they were current as of August 5th, 2016?
Well, I can only speak to my last contact with Mr. Hazelwood, which was July 29th, 2016. That was a phone contact. And my last visit with Mr. Hazelwood in the office, which was July 22nd, 2016. So I can only speak to those medicines being current as of my last contact with him, July 29th, 2016.
And thank you. And what I mean by current is that at the time you had provided a prescription for Mr. Hazelwood of those medications.
Yes.
Okay. We're going to go through each one of them. Would you identify the first medication that you prescribed and explain to the court the purpose of that medication?
Yes. Seroquel, I prescribed in a dose of 400 milligrams. The instruction was to take one pill twice per day. Seroquel is an antipsychotic medication. It is in the same family of medications as the Zyprexa, which was referred to earlier. So Seroquel, 400 milligrams, one twice a day, primarily to treat psychotic symptoms.
Okay. And what's the next medication?
Lamictal, 25 milligrams, 2 pills twice a day. Lamictal is in a family of medicines originally developed as seizure medicines, but have found utility as mood stabilizing medications. And in Mr. Hazelwood's case, the Lamictal was being used to treat his depression.
Okay. And what is the last medication?
Vistaril, 10 milligrams, one pill up to 3 times a day as needed for anxiety. So Vistaril falls into the family of medicines used for other reasons. It's an antihistamine, but in this case it is being used as an anti-anxiety medication to help Mr. Hazelwood with his anxiety.
Okay, and I think you said this, but just to be clear, which one of those medications were designed to treat psychosis?
Seroquel.
Okay. Dr. Simon, mentally ill is defined by statute here in the state of Georgia as having a disorder of thought or mood which significantly impairs judgment, behavior, capacity to recognize reality, or ability to cope with the ordinary demands of life. Based upon your treatment and observations of Mr. Hazelwood, was he suffering from a disorder of thought or mood which significantly impaired his judgment, behavior, capacity to recognize reality, or ability to cope with the ordinary demands of life when you saw him in July 2016?
Yes.
Did you prescribe the Seroquel, the Lamictal, and the Vistaril to Mr. Hazelwood in order to treat any of the disorders of his thought or mood?
Yes.
Did Mr. Hazelwood take the medications as prescribed by you?
This is something that Mr. Hazelwood and I, that I had asked about on multiple occasions. During my treatment of Mr. Hazelwood, it was my understanding that he was taking his medication, but I have been provided information that now indicates that he was not taking his medication.
Okay. And could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
So I'll go back to one point in time, June of 2016. I did receive a phone call from Mr. Hazelwood's primary care physician indicating that he had told that physician that he had stopped all of his medication. I followed up that phone contact with a discussion with Mr. Hazelwood, who in fact told me that he had been untruthful to the primary care physician and that he in fact was taking his medication as prescribed. In December of 2016, I received a letter from Mr. Hazelwood that got to me via his grandmother, in which Mr. Hazelwood wrote to me that he had in fact stopped taking his medications for a while and that he had been untruthful to me.
Okay. And so is it fair to say that you did counsel and encourage Mr. Hazelwood to take his medications as prescribed by you?
Yes.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Dr. Cinnamon, my name is Linda Dominowski. I'm the prosecutor in this case. In your medical opinion, Mr. Hazelwood has a mental illness, yes?
Yes.
Okay. And for 3 years you treated that mental illness with the drugs that you told us about?
Yes, I would only amend your statement by saying mental illnesses.
Mental illnesses, different ones that you identified?
Yes.
All right. And while he was on...
Can I make a clarification? We keep talking about 3 years. Can you give me the time frame?
Yes, Your Honor. I treated Mr. Hazelwood from early June 2013 through late July 2016.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So during that 3-year period of treatment, how often did you see him in person?
I saw Mr. Hazelwood for 82 sessions over the course of those 3 years. Those were in-office sessions. Well, let me amend that by saying Virtually all of those were attended by Mr. Hazelwood. There were maybe 2 or 3 sessions in which I met with his grandparents in his absence, but 82 psychotherapeutic and medication management sessions over the 3 years. It averages to just over 2, something like 2.2 per month. During that period of time, this was in March of 2015, Mr. Hazelwood required a psychiatric hospitalization, during which time he was under the care of other physicians at the hospital, and he returned to my care once he completed the inpatient and the partial hospitalization program.
The hospitalizations, if you know, I don't know if you know, were they a result of him failing to take the medication you had prescribed?
I reviewed the hospital notes. There was no indication that that was the reason for his hospitalization. But this was, excuse me, let me clarify. I just realized. The answer to that question is yes, he had been out of his grandparents' home for a brief period of time. He reported that he had been feeling somewhat better and that he had stopped taking his medicine. So yes, in fact, the hospital record does indicate that he had stopped taking his medicine, and that certainly may have contributed to his need for hospitalization.
So when he sent you the letter via his grandmother, he basically told you, I lied to you when I said I had lied to my primary care physician, and when I lied to you saying I was on my medication, I really had gone off them.
That's correct.
And you said that you had...
Well, I'm sorry, you said lied to his primary care physician. It appears that he had been truthful to the primary care physician. Subsequently, when I asked him about it, he said, no, I told the primary care physician that I was off of them, but I was really on them. So he was misleading to me subsequently. Apparently he had, I don't have any way of knowing for sure that he was exactly at that time off of his medicine, but what he came back saying to me was apparently untruthful.
Okay, when you spoke to him and he tells you, I lied to my primary care physician, I really am taking my medicine, did you do anything to emphasize that he needed to really stay on the medication?
I followed, to the best of my recollection, I followed that up with, yes, your medicine is important to you getting better, and it's important that you continue to take your medicine.
So this is in June of 2016, you received the phone call from the primary care physician. Is that correct? I get the date right there?
Yes.
Okay. And then you have this in-office contact with him in July 22nd of 2016. How did he appear to you at that time?
The way he appeared to me over that particular session was somewhat divided in the sense that the bulk of that session was devoted to a very reasonable and logical discussion about him potentially moving out of his grandparents' home. He did, so in the room for most of that session were his grandparents, Mr. Hazelwood, and the woman that Mr. Hazelwood identifies as his wife, who has otherwise been described as his girlfriend. Toward the end of the session, his wife, girlfriend, described circumstances at home in which Mr. Hazelwood, or outside the office in which Mr. Hazelwood had become quite agitated. In terms of how he appeared to me, there were times when he would look to this woman and he would giggle in somewhat of an unusual way. So to summarize my answer to your question, he appeared generally displaying maybe mild anxiety. His thoughts were logical, but he displayed this unusual giggle when he was communicating privately with this woman.
You don't have any personal control over him as far as twice a day you take the medication, you trust that he takes the medication. Meaning you're not there to force him to take medication.
That's correct.
Okay. So then you have a contact, I believe, a phone contact with him on July 29th?
Yes.
Okay. And what was that in reference to?
After the July 22nd visit, I had wanted to see Mr. Hazelwood the following week. He was working at the time and did not know his work schedule, so I followed up the July 22nd visit with a phone, well, it was actually a series of phone calls. I finally made contact with him on July 29th. The effort was to set up an appointment. He was unable to come in that day, so we were to speak the following, that was a Friday, we were to speak the following Monday for him to come in for an appointment. I did inquire of him how he was feeling. He said the voices and the characters, these are characters that he experiences in his mind, were present but had settled down some. He, at the time, was on his way to his, as he identified her, his wife's graduation, and that he would call me to schedule the appointment early the following week.
Okay. So I'm going to go back now to therapeutic levels. The Seroquel and other drugs that you had Mr. Hazelwood on, you've got therapeutic levels in someone's system. If he stopped taking those drugs, how long would it be for him to get therapeutic level out of his system?
There's a term called half-lives in which the blood level of the medication drops by 50%. I don't know these numbers exactly, but they would generally be measured in hours, not days, but there's a little bit more to that. So the blood level drops fairly quickly. It doesn't necessarily mean that the brain impact of the medicine drops in accordance with the blood level. But it is reasonable that certainly within days certainly within a small number of days, symptoms would reappear, could reappear.
I'll pass the witness back.
No further questions. Thank you, Doctor. We have no further evidence.
and we will get an order out and reconvene at the appropriate time. Clear the court space. Clear the court space. That's media too. Clear the court. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
I just need to